pleasant day, everyone. Today we will talk about global migration. What is global migration and its impact on both sending and receiving countries? First is the two types of migration: internal migration and international migration. One refers to a movement of people from one area to another within the country. For example, a family living in Lanao del Norte will migrate to Manila City for some reasons. Next, international migration, movement of people from one country to another crossing borders. Some of these are OFWs that prefers to live on abroad to make their lives more successful and better. Is broken up to five groups. First, immigrants, people who move to another country permanently, a family who plan to live the rest of their life in the US are called immigrants. Second, workers or temporary immigrants, workers who stay in another country for a fixed period, usually 6 months in duration of stay, and it differs on the immigrated country. Third, illegal migrants refers to the migration of people into a country through means that violates the immigration law of the country, or the continued residence of people without the legal right to live in that country. When you stayed in that country beyond the duration stated in your contract is considered as illegal. Fourth, petition families. Immigrants petitions if anyone wants to become a permanent resident of the US and obtain a green card. An immigrant petition needs to be filed with the persons. We have either a relative and employer. Immigrant visa petition are family-based petitions and employment-based petitions. In short, the one who could file this for a person's behalf is either a relative or an employer of that person. Last, refugees or asylum, people that are unable or unwilling to return on their own land because of fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, or membership in a particular social group or political opinion. For example, the refugees of Jews in the Philippines during the war in Israel, when there are other colonies who want to colonize Israel. There are some refugees who came to Philippines to stay here for their safety, and they are called refugees. Global statistics, there are 90% economic reasons of global migration and 10% of refugees. The countries that top percent: Australia, who have 99%, United Kingdom 95%, and USA 92%. Because of this global migration, global issues arise. Debate. Anti-migrant groups and nationalists argue that government must control legal immigration and put a stop to illegal entry of foreigners to prevent conflicts between or within the country. So the nationalists people and the anti-migrant groups would prefer to speak out to the government to action out about migrants on the country. Because of global migrants are present also. Some of this is the 2011 data from Harvard that states that likelihood and magnitude of adverse labor market effects for native from immigration are substantially weaker than often perceived. They see it as very small than they expected. But on the other hand, government take actions about it. So as 2013, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reported that the native-born citizens still receive higher support compared to the immigrants because the government expresses high value and attention to its own citizens. And in terms of refugees from Syria and Iran, though there has been a massive ongoing of refugees that ring the bells of global issues, imaging as expected. They don't. There are no reports about they created a conflict on their hosting countries. And inflow of refugees from Middle East has not affected the social welfare program in Germany and its economy. And instead of huge impact in salary and employment wages, the labor of economy has constantly increasing. So they portray a good result on their hosting countries. The International Monetary Fund predicted that the flow of refugees fleeing the war in Syria and Iraq would actually grow Europe's gross domestic product because of albeit modestly, which they see or perceive it as these refugees could help the Europe countries' economy. Global migration and detriments for the sending countries. Even if 90% of the value generated by migrant workers remains in their host countries, they have sent billions back to their home countries. In fact, in 2014, the remittances totaled $580 billion, including the Philippines, who have 528 billion. These remittances make significant contributions to the development of small and medium-term industries that help generate jobs. Remittances likewise change the economic and social the purchasing power of the migrants' family doubles and make it possible for the children to start or continue their schooling. These countries are the world's top remittance recipients as of 2018, shown by statistics. The Asian Development Bank observes that in countries like the Philippines, remittances therefore help in lifting households out of poverty, but not in rebalancing growth, especially in the long run. Do not have significant influence on other key items of consumption or investment, such as spending on education and healthcare. More importantly, global migration is siphoning and removing dynamic young workers because the young workers tend to go abroad for better salary and compensation for themselves. Government 52% of Filipinos who live for work in developed world have tertiary education, which is more than double the 23% of the overall Filipino population. The loss of professional in certain key roles such as doctors has been detrimental to the migrants sending countries. The process has often referred to as brain drain is seeing the global migration as the removing of dynamic young workers is from the McKinsey Global Institute, which is related to the problem of human trafficking. Issue of brain drain, sending states must likewise protect migrant workers. The United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, lists human trafficking as the third largest criminal activity worldwide. In 2012, the International Labor Organization identified 21 million men, women, and children as victims of forced labor, and appalling 3 out of every 1,000 persons worldwide. There is also 90% of the victims, or 18.7 million, are exploited by private enterprise and entrepreneurs. There is also 22%, or 4.5 million, are sexually abused, and 68%, or 14.2 million, work under compulsion in agricultural, manufacture, infrastructure, and domestic activities. Human trafficking has been profitable, earning syndicates, smugglers, and corrupt state officials profits of as high as $150 billion in year 2014. Governments, the private sector, and civil society groups have worked together to combat human trafficking. Yet the results remain uneven because there are many factors affecting this combat. There could be an official, government official who is protector of that syndicate, human trafficking syndicate. So the result is still uneven, and this issue still remains as of in contemporary world. Integration to how migrants interact with their new home country contribute significantly to a host nation's gross domestic product, but their access to housing, healthcare, and education is not easy because they are newcomers. There is, of course, considerable variation in the economic integration of migrants. Migrants from China, India, and Western Europe often have more access, while those from Middle East, North America, and Sub-Saharan Africa face greater challenges in securing jobs. In the United States and Singapore, there are blue-collar as well as white-collar Filipino workers such as doctors, engineers, and corporate executives. And it is professional, white-collar workers that have oftentimes been easier to integrate. Migrants unwittingly reinforce the tension by giving among themselves. The first time and come into a new and often strange place is mitigated by local networks of fellow citizens that serve as the migrant's safety net from the dislocation of uprooting oneself. For instance, the China or Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association of California provides essential support for new Chinese migrants, guiding them in finding work or in setting up their small businesses like restaurants and laundromats in the state and elsewhere. The drawback of this network is that instead of facilitating its integration, they exacerbate differences and discrimination. In conclusion, and like the broader globalization process, it is uneven. Some migrants experience their movement as a liberating process. A highly educated professional may find moving to another country financially rewarding. At the other end, a victim of sex trafficking may view the process of migration as dislocating and disempowering. Like globalization, migration has contradictory responses. They do for numerous factors that already mentioned. Despite these benefits, developed countries continue to excessively limit and restrict migrant labor. And despite these various contradictions, it is clear that different forms of global independence will ensure that global migration will continue to be one of the major issues in the contemporary world. Some want to preserve what they perceive as local culture by shielding it from newcomers. Countries whose economies have become entirely dependent on globalization and rely on foreign labor to continue growing, like Singapore, Saudi Arabia, and even protectionist Japan, will actively court foreign workers. It is inevitable that countries will have to open up again to prevent their economies from stagnating or even collapsing. The various responses to this movement movements, and extreme nationalism in the receiving countries, dependency in the sending countries will continue to be pressing issues.